Three DUIs, jail, psych meds, rock bottom so low I thought I'd never climb out. But what saved me wasn't just quitting drinking, it was discovering a spiritual path I never knew existed. Welcome to Mystical Sobriety, a channel for seekers, misfits, and a spiritually curious type of person in recovery. To get started, I want to tell you a little bit about what it was like. So, brief personal history. I started drinking in my late teens, and for some people, alcoholism is a progressive disease. For others, it just starts right off the bat. Mine was definitely more of the progressive variety. And throughout my 20s, it got progressively worse and worse. I started racking up DUIs. I couldn't stop drinking no matter how badly I wanted to and how badly it was actually impacting my life. I would begin to get arrested for being drunk in public, for domestic violence, for hurting people and property. I'd go to jail in the drunk tank. I was being put on psych meds. I was getting hospitalized at the mental hospital frequently on weekends. I was running to therapy, hoping that it would help, but I was still drinking and I was ruining all my relationships and just waking up in constant anxiety and just hating my life. And then even if I did manage to stop drinking, I'd have some stints of like 3 to 6 months of sobriety. The dis-ease within me just still made life pretty unbearable. I just couldn't stand being sober. I couldn't stand being in my own skin. So there were a lot of mental health issues and like trauma that I was really not facing yet. I was weary about AA and I just kept relapsing, and the whole spiritual malady was really manifesting during this time, and not to mention some codependency, which I hadn't had the chance to take a look at yet. What happened is I just kept crying out to God. I wasn't sure even existed. I started to have, once I got my third DUI, I actually ended up in jail for 3.5 months and then was court ordered to rehab for another 3 months. And at that point, I was like, okay, I really don't have a handle on this because even though that all happened, I still continued to drink and drive. And it's difficult enough that it happened. It's more difficult to admit that on a YouTube channel. And it's difficult to just really, when I really sit with that, even though I've made peace with a lot of it, to really understand what the repercussions of that could have been. And I did get in accidents. I did crash into people. I did crash and total multiple cars and hurt a lot of property. And not to mention, just set everybody on edge all the time. My parents were frequently wondering if I was alive or not. And quite honestly, so was I was wondering that too. And I think that frightening time really came for me after that third DUI, after the jail time, after the rehab, when I was trying to live independently and on my own. I was working, I was renting a room, had some roommates, and I just could not stay sober. And I ended up drinking, and I was on an awful binge for about a month. And my roommates told me they were afraid to live with me. And I don't blame them at all. And I realized I have lost all control of this. I do not have control. My best thinking, all of the knowledge that I have around drinking is not keeping me sober. All of the repercussions, all of the legal issues, all of the financial issues, all of the relationship issues, all of the health issues. I was like 170 pounds. I am 5'2". I had really high blood sugar. I'd gone to the doctor and my liver was, I had a fatty alcoholic liver, which sounds just as sexy as it is. That's when I was genuinely afraid and completely surrendered. Like I felt a part of myself, the inside of myself just die in that moment. And I prayed to that God that I didn't know existed. It's the same one that Bill Wilson prayed to. God, if there is a God, help me. And it could really be that simple. I went into a transitionary period in my life at that point when I was like, I really just need to go all in on my recovery. No more half measures. I can't half-ass this. This is my life. And I went through this pretty horrible 30-day withdrawal process because I was like, okay, I'm going to change jobs. I'm going to go back to sober living. I'm going to get really into meetings. And I had to wait for a bed to open up during that time. And in that 30-day period, I was suffering the physical withdrawal of alcohol, the emotional reality of what this really meant. Like, I truly was the real deal alcoholic that the big book talks about. And what does that mean for my future? What does that mean for my social life? And what does that mean for how I feel in my own skin, in my own body? and just the emotional repercussions of having to face everything that I had been running away from, and just the actual spiritual pain. Because even though at this time I had become, I said I was Christian, and I definitely would identify as that during that time, I was in no way, shape, or form relying on any type of higher power or any understanding that God was there with me. There was just such a gap between who I claimed I was as a Christian in my faith and who I actually was showing up as and operating as in the world. During that 30-day period, I often really remember that time as a time that like God was nearest to me, because I was in the most amount of pain. And I really do mean that in all ways, shapes, and forms. And so I leaned heavily on like sugar, and like podcasts were in my ears 24/7. The only time maybe I didn't, I was gonna say maybe when I was in the shower, but not even then, because I would put it on in the shower in the bathroom while I was showering. So I was highly dependent on just like being outside of myself. Like I just could not stand silence. I could not stand being by myself. I could not stand, actually, I couldn't stand being around other people. I would get off of work, go into my room and lay on my mattress, which was on the floor, and just listen to podcasts. Like I would do nothing else. I would play like maybe a game on my phone. I just anything besides just being able to sit still with myself. And then I did finally get into sober living. And so then I moved, I changed jobs. I was all in, had to change my life from the bottom to the top. I was ready to just surrender all of it, because clearly what I was had going on hadn't been working for me. All of my best decision making had gotten me still relapsed and hospitalized, even after 3 DUIs and jail time and rehab. And at that time, I was like, okay, I really need to get my bipolar 2 disorder diagnosis under control. So I got back into sober living. I started working a steady and reliable job. Some people just get well jobs, which is you're taking something under what you are qualified for, but it's steady, it's not super stressful, you know what to expect. And then I started making and attending my psychiatrist appointments and getting on the correct medications in order to manage the bipolar 2. And I really just dug in. I started going to meetings. I started to actually do the step work. And the step work is especially where the big shift came in. So I got plugged into a group in San Diego called the Big Book Awakening, and they basically go through the book through this method that Dan Sherman created a workbook, and Mark Houston talked a lot about the way of doing the work, and Tyler Colton pioneered it here in Southern California. And this shifted everything. My center of gravity moved from me to God, basically. I really understood what it meant to be completely reliant and dependent upon a power greater than myself, one that wanted the best for me. The motto, I literally used to have it as an alarm in my phone to, I believe it was like maybe every hour, I would have a reminder that would say, Thy will, not mine, be done. And what it's like now is 7 years later, it's an ongoing journey, and it's not always perfect, and it's not always my fault. I'm not always, but it's not always perfect because I'm not always obedient. And I still sometimes think that I need to be running the show. But the tremendous amount of peace and joy that I have in my life today is something that I never would have expected, especially not from those 30 days that I was in this hellhole of a asylum that I had created for myself in my dungeon of a room with a mattress on the floor. Just that pain and that ache, that deep loneliness that I had. I was just curled up on the floor in the fetal position and just holding on to myself literally until I could fall asleep, because it was just that painful to exist. And I don't have that anymore. That's not, it makes me so sad for me, but grateful and impressed that I got through that. And I know that I got through that with the help of God for sure. Now, my journey is not perfect, not always obedience to what I know I should be doing or how I should be surrendering. I went through some phases where I did question AA and the Big Book Awakening after losing to so many people, especially sponsees who I was working with, to addiction, and wondering, does this even work? How is it that this is not working for the people who are doing the work? This is not what I was promised. And that unpredictability and that unreliability of the step work really knocked me off my own, actually knocked it off of its own pedestal, because then I was like, wait, there are still flaws around this. And it really reminded me that I'm not God. Like I cannot control other people's behaviors. I cannot control how other people do the work. I can't control whether or not somebody stays sober. And I really had to relinquish control of that. And I really began to see also where I was still inserting my own self-will in parts of my life and where I was thinking that I knew better instead of really surrendering to what God's will for me might have been and really seeking God in meditation. But I'm still here. I'm trying, I'm sharing, I'm growing, and something that has just continued to grow me is the introduction to mystical sobriety. So, why mystical sobriety? Now, first of all, I am Christian, but I'm not here to convert you. And I don't think that you would find my brand of Christianity necessarily mainstream or maybe what you reflected to you on a television news broadcast or whatever. I don't want to get too political here, but we'll save that for later on because I am involved in that in a different way than probably you would anticipate. Basically, I grew up Catholic and I liked the idea of the mysticism there, the rituals, the mystery, the awe, the wonder, the deep reverence that the Catholics have for God and Jesus and Mary, right? That was so beautiful to me. But I couldn't really understand how that fits into the modern world. And so I drifted away from it and I got really into like New Age and manifestation and positive thinking. And like I really got away from traditional religion and began to practice these other forms of understanding the universe. But what I ended up finding, especially once I got into AA, and then I found God when I was in my early alcoholism again and really struggling. And I had this experience with God in my apartment in downtown Riverside where I was just like, oh, I need to give my life over to God now. And so I did. And I actually ended up moving to get close to a church that was aligned with a message that I believed. And still, I was trying to manhandle my life and make it look a certain way and feel a certain way. And as I navigated my way in and out of the rooms of AA throughout my alcoholism, I found that I had to really let go of this very limited idea of the Santa Claus God, right? This, if I'm good, I'll be given what I want. And that's just not how God works. And so I did end up getting back into Christianity, but it just really didn't necessarily help my alcoholism. In fact, I really do recall times when I would just drink and be like, God, just praying, God, don't let anything terrible happen this time. Or God, help me get out of this time. Or God, please don't let me drink this time. Now in sobriety, I've really found some other resources to continue to grow in my understanding, in my love, and my relationship with God. And I am happy to give some more information on these resources. Actually, I'm building out a website right now to direct everyone to with some of this information. But there are some podcasts I could just tell you right off the bat. My Strange Bible with Tim Mackey. Tim Mackey is just a pro at the Bible, and he really truly gets down to the nitty-gritty and Bible literacy, really, and understanding and unfolding the whole story of the Bible because it is a story, it is a piece of literature that we should ingest. And just like poetry is mystical and there's something that happens to us in our souls and our hearts when we read it, the same thing should be happening to us when we are ingesting and taking in the Bible. It is not a manual for life. It is not something that we read literally and try to, like, that doesn't make any sense. That's not how the Bible was written. So, My Strange Bible is a great podcast to listen to. There's also the Bible Project, which Tim Mackey is a part of, and you can go to their website. They all have great resources, but also check them out on YouTube. They have a lot of like short explainer videos for each of the books of the Bible, which I found super helpful as I began to actually deeply read and have an experience with the Bible. I also got involved with the Red Letter Christians who really reflected what I felt Jesus meant when he said the things that he said, the red letters in the Bible, and really honoring the people on this earth and the earth itself. And so I have found a lot of purpose in that. And it also transitioned me into learning more about contemplative Christianity, right? Contemplative prayer. So Richard Rohr, Cynthia Bourgeault, and James Finley. And James Finley, I actually ended up taking his mystical sobriety course through the Center for Action and Contemplation. And this really began what I feel is my second spiritual awakening. I was going through this very desert experience in my faith, especially when I got sick and I was having kind of financial type of issues and also family issues and just beginning to really seep in some resentments that I needed to look at and some patterns that I had kept repeating in my own family life. And I got hooked up to this mystical sobriety course, and it really opened me up again in this way that I hadn't experienced since going through the Big Book Awakening and making amends and doing my fourth step and all of this. This is the integration that I've been trying to build on this channel really for YouTube, but now it has this name and now I didn't have to name it. I really find a sense of like this is full circle now that I have found mystical sobriety because this is what I have been trying to integrate together, which is this deep knowing and understanding that we are inexplicably loved and held regardless of whatever our circumstances look like, because that has been my experience. And that is the experience that I wish to share with other addicts and alcoholics, especially who struggle with sobriety and just being alive sober. It sounds ridiculous, but I feel like we are so finely attuned to the pain and like kind of the misery of this world and also the joy that we're so sensitive to it. This is why we numb out. This is why we have to numb out because we don't fit in. We don't feel how any of this makes any sense any other way. But there is a way, and it's through understanding what our place is in our relationship with God and how beautiful and close God is to each of us. And so I say all of this because this is relationship. This is not me telling you to believe what I want you to believe. Your relationship with God is not going to be my relationship with God. What God tells you is going to be different than what God tells me. But the underlying current here will always be rooted in honesty, purity, love, and being of service. And so I hope that you will find some type of maybe even inspiration, I will say that, or some comfort at minimum about your own journey in not just sobriety, but in recovery. I use the word sobriety because that's what a lot of people will cling to. When you say recovery, people don't really understand what you're recovering. And I like to imagine that we are recovering our original spiritual selves that we were created to be. We came to this earth as spiritual, energetic little babies, and we grow more and more into our humanity, and we begin to lose some of that contact that we have with the spiritual life that we so intrinsically have when we're born. This is why I say when people are struggling, let's get back to what you were like when you were a child. What were you like as a kid? What did you like as a kid? What interested you as a kid? Because that's when I think we were at our purest, and that's what I mean by purity. I'm not going to ever at any point give you rules about what you should be doing with your life. I'm not going to tell you anything like that. This is just about your growth in your relationship and your underlying basis and foundation in love and truth, honesty, helpfulness. And I feel like if you can have a little bit of an open mind, even if you do hear the term God, you'll have a different experience here than maybe you anticipated. So you'll still continue to hear a lot of my stories, just the raw honesty around recovery and where I'm at and my whole experience. But I am going to begin to weave in a little bit more of the mysticism, the contemplative prayer practices that I've been putting in place and kind of the experiences that I'm having. And I leave comments off of everything almost, and I don't really reply to DMs, if I'm being quite honest, like on Instagram or Facebook. But here on YouTube, I reply and I read every comment. So this is a place where we can have discussion. This is a place where I want to hear what your guys' experiences are. And I really want to be able to provide more resources for people because I do think, like I was saying, I feel like addicts and alcoholics are so finely attuned to the darkness and to the light. And the reason that we try to seek escape or numb through drugs and alcohol is because we just can't really process it without the right tools, without the right connection, without the right power. And I feel like a lot of us tend to be creatives or misfits or just the seekers and the dreamers. And so that's what this is going to be for. I'm going to just continue to keep that in this type of channel, right? I want this to be sobriety content with some depth, not like toxic positivity or just don't pick up no matter what. That shit doesn't work, okay? If it does work, you're probably not the gutter drunk, blackout, almost killing people type of drunk that I was. And if you were that type of person and that works for you, I'm so grateful and I'm so glad that worked for you. And thank God you didn't have to. And this isn't like a contest of who had it worse. It's just do what works for you. That stuff did not work for me. Again, I just really want to talk more about the spiritual awakening and the spiritual sobriety journey, the mysticism, the contemplative prayer, recovery community, that and building connection, right? So, all of this to say that I truly believe that you are made in the image of God and you are already loved, not because you're good, but because God is good, as Richard Rohr says. I want you to subscribe to this channel if any of this resonates with you. And if it doesn't, that's okay. I understand if you unsubscribe. I would love to hear more about if there's any specific kind of content that you're interested in hearing about, specifically as far as Christian mysticism, contemplative prayer, sobriety, recovery, addiction, mental health, my bipolar 2 diagnosis, and where we're at with that now. You can follow me on Instagram as well. I've been using some clips of some of my favorite modern mystics and posting them on there. You're going to hear a lot of James Finley, Mark Houston, and just some other quotes, Richard Rohr. I'm going to put some Cynthia Bourgeault up there as well. And you can follow me on Instagram. So that's Mystical Sobriety. I'll be including a website and some more resources here pretty soon. And if you're in the Southern California area, I will be creating some little special events, some little get-togethers for us. And I might actually try doing some live events through YouTube Live in the future. Maybe by events, I'm just saying meditation or yeah, just some like meditation time together. I know accountability helps a lot for addicts and alcoholics. Otherwise, just go ahead and leave me a comment. I'm so grateful that you're here and thanks for being here.